Welcome to another year in review race ranking video. Last year I ran a half marathon every month in a new country, and this year I didn't do that, but I did do 2 marathons, 3 half marathons, and a series of smaller races across Europe. Let's talk about them. Now, a quick disclaimer before we get started is that all of my races this year were so different and unique. Last year was pretty easy to do the rankings because it was just half marathons where they all had the same goal, get to the finish line. This year, it was a bit different. I had a lot more bucket list experiences on my rankings, and so my rankings might not be yours, and that's okay. If you don't know me, hello, I'm Sadie. I'm a travel specialist for runners. I help runners and running clubs create their dream vacations around European races. I offer services for every level and type of planner, from consultation calls to finalized details, to itinerary building, to end-to-end trip planning. I can do it all. If you're interested in learning more, check out the link in description. All right, not to start on a negative note, but this was the worst race I ran in 2024. Now, I have run a lot of half marathons, and I am someone who always tries to find a positive in a race. The only positive I could find out of this race, the Triple Threat Rockport Half Marathon, was that they give you free race photos. The streets are not closed, the water stations are kind of willy-nilly. They're technically in the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th miles, but sometimes they're at the start of the mile and sometimes they're at the end of the mile. So it's really 1 to 3 miles between each station. And when you're starting a race in August at 9:15, you need consistent water. I understand that you can't put more water stations out. 6 stations, that's a lot. But the fact that they were not consistent was the real problem. In addition, this course is 100% hills. You are either going up hills or down hills, and you're doing all of that while you are pressed all the way to the side of the roads with bushes hitting your legs and cars passing right on your side. It was not a fun time, and it was a very expensive race. Honestly, I would be shocked if there were any runners who are on this organizational team. The next race in my rankings is actually miles and miles and miles ahead of the Rockport Half Marathon. And this is the Gran Premio de Natal. It's a Lisbon 10K. It was a little bit hilly, but it was nice. They have the cutest race shirts. They're these long sleeve shirts designed to look like Christmas sweaters. I absolutely love them. However, Lisbon in December is fine, but they're not like famous for their Christmas markets. So I wouldn't recommend traveling out of your way to go visit this race because it was basically just your average 10K race, aside from the super cute shirts. The next race on my list is also located in Portugal, and this is the Marginal Noite in Oeiras, Portugal. So this is about 45 minutes outside of Lisbon, and it is a night race that takes place in June. Now, the race itself is, again, a pretty standard 8-kilometer race, aside from the fact that it's actually 7.8 kilometers. They do have that on their website. It's approximately 8 kilometers, fine print 7.8. It's not that special. There are some parts of the course where you definitely need to have a headlamp, or people were using their phone flashlights because there were no street lamps around and you could not see where you were running. But the reason you should do this race is because June in Portugal is Festas Populares, and that is my favorite time to be in Portugal. There's just all of these different saints that are being celebrated with these massive street parties and music and just a festival vibe, and this race really takes place during that. You know, you reach the finish line and you're about a 5-minute walk from the Oeiras party. It's amazing. Coming in at number 6 on my rankings is a really fun race, but it's also in Portugal, and again, it falls in that range of I wouldn't necessarily recommend traveling to Portugal for any of these races, but if you're in Portugal during the time of year, I would recommend going out of your way to go to this race. And this is the Corrida Noturna de Costa da Caparica. And so this is about 30 minutes outside of Lisbon on the Costa da Caparica beaches. This run is at sunset and it is so gorgeous, just running along the water. It is on the sand, but the sand is pretty packed down, so it's not horrible running on this section of road. And it's just a really fun race. That being said, there's no medal at the finish line. Bolas de Belém, which is a delicious Portuguese donut that is filled with kind of a custard, and I love them. It was amazing after the race. The only issues with this race, besides being on the beach, there's no markers. You just kind of reach a point on the beach where you'll see someone telling you to turn around, which is fine, except this area of beach is very long and wide and flat, and there are a lot of tidal pools that get caught up. So you think you're safe, you think you're running on sand, whoops, you've actually been separated from the course by a tidal pool, and now you and the 50 runners around you have to run through the water in order to reconnect to the race. But that just made it more of an adventure, and honestly, I loved the entire experience. Number 5 on my list is the Padova Half Marathon in Italy, and this is the first race that I would recommend traveling for because I traveled for this race and I absolutely loved it. Now, it is in the number 5 spot because it is missing that extra wow factor that my top 4 all had, but at the same time, it's a really consistent, good race. It has a great expo with lots of vendors. It has this really nice medal. It has a flat and fast course. It cuts through adorable villages in the Italian countryside and lots of open farmland with lovely views and weather. And it's also just in a really interesting part of northern Italy. You're about an hour outside of Venice, you can take a few days there, you can go to Verona, you can stay in Padova, you can go to Lake Garda, Brescia, Bergamo. I mean, I did all of these. I was there for a week after the race and I loved exploring the region and I loved this race. However, someone does have to be in the number 5 spot, and the top 4 races, like I said, all had this extra wow that Padova unfortunately doesn't have. Number 4 on my list is the Swiss City Half Marathon. I loved this race, not necessarily because of the course. The course was good. It was very hilly in the first half and pretty flat in the second half. And there was a lot of times you spent running through buildings, which was odd, but whatever. It was kind of cool. But I loved this race because of the atmosphere around it. You had, while you were running, Alp horns, accordions, giant cowbells, plus all those regular instruments that you'll normally find. You had tons of people who were out cheering, lots of little kids giving high fives, local people who'd set up their own tables and their own cheer zones with refreshments if you wanted them, plus plenty of refreshment stops. And I just found that everything around this race was amazing. And of course, the views were to die for. Running around Lake Lucerne with the Alps all around you was a gorgeous experience. You could almost forget that you were running up some pretty big hills. In addition, this race has a lot of free stuff that you get when you sign up that I don't typically see. So the sign up at first is very expensive, but if you're traveling from outside of Switzerland, you can really make it worth your money. For starters, there's a pasta party that is free for all runners with your ticket, and you get free transportation starting 3 days before the race and going 3 days after the race to come from and go to Lucerne, which for me, flying in and out of Zurich meant I did not have to pay for my train ticket from Zurich to Lucerne and back, which was pretty much made this race one of the cheapest races because of that benefit of free transportation. In addition, they had really nice shirts, I'll just say it. They were cute and blue. And I do like this medal. From what I have seen, this is basically the medal you will also get if you run it. They tend to use this exact format and just update the years. They think they've done it like 3 or 4 years in a row now. So, pretty good race. Highly recommend it, just for the instruments, honestly. I mean, who's ever thought they'd be running serenaded by Alp horns? Starting my top 3 is the Paris Marathon. This race is one of my favorites because of the view. This was my first marathon I ever did, and I think it's a great first marathon. The views that you're gonna be passing, you pass the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, a bunch of castles, all these famous Parisian avenues, the Opera House, and you start and finish at the Arc de Triomphe. It is just full of views. Now that being said, it's also pretty full of hills, especially in the second half. Right when you're hitting those last 5 kilometers, you also hit a pretty big, kind of long and slow hill. And when you're running past the Eiffel Tower, you're going in and out of a lot of tunnels, including the tunnel that Princess Diana died in, which I think is just a fun fact because I wouldn't expect a race to run through that. The crowds were also really good. I found they were pretty continuous throughout the course. They did get a little bit weaker when you were out near the castles. And in those last like 3 kilometers, they got a little too intense. I wish there was more enforcement of keeping people off the course because people were so excited. They were just squeezing in, and then people were hopping in to run a little bit with their loved ones, which is so sweet. But as someone who had no family there to cheer for me, stay off my course. Don't get your big backpack in my face, you know? My second favorite race of the year was the Peniche Corrida das Fogueiras. I might have butchered that. That is the bonfire race, 15 kilometers in Peniche, Portugal. It is about an hour and a half outside of Lisbon, and it was such a fun event. It felt like you were truly experiencing the community of Portugal in a way that none of the major races in Lisbon can offer. Now, I loved this race because you start in the village of Pnish and you are running, and there's bands and there's so many people who are out and cheering for you, and all the grandmas and grandpas with their pots and pans banging the wooden spoons off of them, and the little kids getting high fives, and everybody is out. And then you head along the coast, and that's where the fire part of this, because every 100, 200, 300 feet-ish, they were throwing up a giant bonfire. And these bonfires were so cool, and you were running right next to them, and you'd pass one, you could already see the next one and the next one on the horizon, and it was just this lovely experience. Now, there are a few hills on this course, but to be honest, you'll be a little distracted by the bonfires, so you hopefully won't notice them. In addition, along with the medal at the finish line, you also can get yourself 3 sardines. That's right, you get 3 uncooked sardines. That is then your job to go to some bonfires they have set up and grill them yourself. It's a really fun experience. I recommend, if you're traveling for this race, spend at least one night in Peniche. This could be a great stop if you're going from Porto to Lisbon or the other way, and really make the most of your time in this amazing surfing city. Now let's talk about my favorite race this year. Marathon du Médoc. This wine marathon is the original wine marathon. There are 22 tastings of Bordeaux wine that you get while you run. There's also cotton candy, steak, oysters, popsicles, local cakes, sausages, and normal water and other food and drinks. It is an absolute party, especially because every runner is required to fit their dress code for the year. And the dress code in 2024 was Make Your Games in honor of the Olympics, and the dress code in 2025 will be the Sea. This race takes place in September every year, and the registration will open in early March. I recommend following them on Instagram to make sure you don't miss when their registration opens if you want to do it. This is considered also the longest marathon in the world because despite it being officially 26.2 miles, you tend to start swerving a bit as you drink a little more, which makes it, for me, it was about 27.6 miles, I think, at the end of the day, a whole extra mile. Now, I got my bib for this race about 9 days before the race happened, which doesn't usually happen, but someone I know won a giveaway and said, hey, I already have a bib. Sadie, do you want this? And I said yes. So I booked my flights, I booked my hostel, and I went to Bordeaux with very little time and no training at all, and I still managed to finish the race in 6 hours and 27 minutes. The goal of this race is not to go fast. The goal of this race is to finish ahead of the sweeper van, which will come in between 6.5 to 7 hours. Officially, they say 6.5. However, it does start after all the runners have started, and then it'll take 6.5 hours on the course, so you have closer to 7 hours to actually get to the finish line. And that's my 2024 races wrapped. From a horrible experience at the Rockport Half Marathon to an amazing experience at basically every other race. These races were so much fun. I can't wait to see what 2025 brings. I've already signed up for 1 marathon and a half marathon, and I'll definitely be doing another wine marathon, just maybe not Médoc. There's over 24 across Europe. So if you're interested in learning more about any of these races and how I can help you travel to them, check out my link in description to see more about my planning. Thanks!